Yeah. So anyway, this club has been really a key part of my fishing life here in Oregon. So it's great to be back and talk to you folks. Tonight, I'm going to talk about hatches through the seasons and patterns that come up as we go through the season, the whole year. And it's a lot to talk about. We're not going to cover every hatch that we're going to see in a year because that would take us all day. But I'm going to hit on the main ones. So that's the goal tonight, is to kind of go through what you might find in different seasons and, see what the patterns work and some of the fishing that you can run into. If you've watched any of my DVDs, not the Anatomy of a Trout Stream, but some of the others, you know who the Bugwan is. The Bugwan is the guru that answers all your bug questions. He's around somewhere. He comes and goes. So, we've got winter, December, January, February, spring, summer, and fall. So let's get started with winter, since that's kind of right around the corner here. December is going to be here before you know it. And the nice thing is, with fly fishing for trout, there are hatches every month of the year of some type. Now, not every day is going to be a good hatch, and some seasons are a little sparser than others. But you can find bug hatches any month of the year. So that's one of the nice things about fly fishing for trout and being an entomologist, an aquatic entomologist. So in the winter, one of the main ones are the blue-winged olives, and I'm going to talk about those in some depth because it's a really important mayfly hatch, not just in the winter. But you can run into those in the winter. And then the other one, of course, are the midges, which, again, found every month of the year practically. There are caddis hatches in the winter, particularly in February when things start to warm up a little bit. You can definitely run into some nice caddis hatches. And then the nymphs, such as stonefly nymphs and some of the other nymphal stages, they're on the river bottom throughout the year. And so when it comes to nymph fishing, you've always got a population of nymphs out there that fish are feeding on. And in fact, in the winter is when the population of nymphs are at their greatest. That's the greatest abundance of nymphs in the stream bottom is in the winter, because the adults have laid their eggs through the spring, summer, and fall. The eggs have hatched, and all those young nymphs are crawling around on the stream bottom or lake bottom throughout the winter, growing, preparing for their emergence the following warmer part of the season. So let's dive into the blue-winged olives and talk about them a bit, because it's really the most important hatches you're going to run into throughout the year. And if there's one group of patterns you're going to want to have in your fly box, no matter where you go fishing, could be Idaho, Montana, British Columbia, Saskatchewan, Pennsylvania, you're going to want blue-winged olive patterns in your fly box. And this is the nymph. They're small. Usually 16s and 18s would be about the size hook you would use. Often 18s are going to be best. Small gills on the side of the abdomen, 3 tails. The antennae are longer when the head is wide. And make sure when you tie your flies, you've got the antennae longer than the head wide. No, you don't have to worry about that. But they're really a small insect that can be very abundant. And what makes them, one of the things that makes them so important is they're very active. They're very good swimmers. And so these little guys are out there swimming around a lot. Here's a few more pictures. There's a lot of different species of blue-winged olives. So fly fishermen tend to think when they say a common name, you're talking about an individual species. But typically those common names really refer to a group of species. And that's certainly true with blue-winged olives. There's a good dozen different species, and there's some are even in different genera. And you'll see them in slightly different colors as nymphs. These are all different types of blue-winged olives. This one that just came up is a little tiny one that hatches in the fall called Acentrella, but we'd see it and we'd call it a blue-winged olive, which is just fine. And here's another species of blue-winged olive. And this is one reason why if you fish the Metolius one day, you might see a size 18 gray blue-winged olive, and then you go fish the Crooked River the next day and you'll see a size 16 tan blue-winged olive. So, you're looking at different species. And as I mentioned, they're all good swimmers. There's a little video of a tray. These were collected in the Hughes River. But you can see how good they swim. They're just really active little swimmers. And because they don't cling to the rocks and they swim a lot, they get into drift where trout can see them. So blue-winged olive nymphs are one of the most frequently eaten food forms by trout, just day in and day out. It's one of the things trout typically see in just about any trout stream you fish and feed on. And this didn't turn out very good. I'll show another picture of the pattern here. I don't know why that's looking weird, but it is. So this is the kind of habitat, little riffles like this. This is a stream in Wyoming, actually, the Encampment River. This was in, well, early spring, late winter. And this river is loaded with bugs. I did a bug class back there for the club there in Sarasota, Wyoming. And we went out and we did sampling, and it was full of big stonefly nymphs and big green drake nymphs and large caddis. So we went out nymphing the next day. There was no hatch, and we put on bigger nymphs. We weren't doing well at all. We put on a size 18 blue-winged olive nymph, and before you know it, you're catching fish. So it was just such an interesting example of how these trout like to eat these little tiny blue-winged olive nymphs. So even when there's lots of other food forms out there, these little fly patterns that match these guys can be extremely useful. Okay, there's the fly pattern that I use a lot. Oop, that's right, the little right there. Very simple, little crystal flash body, a little dubbing at the thorax. That's about it. Usually I tie it on an 18 short shanked hook, like a little scud hook or something, but I don't usually weight it because you don't want it to get fat. You want to keep your pattern slender because these nymphs are naturally slender. So try to keep your fly slender, and you fish it close to the bottom. They do swim up to the surface when they're emerging, so it doesn't always need to be on the bottom if you're fishing during a hatch. But the trout are out there feeding on them. Here's the done stage. Typical looking blue-winged olive. This is a male. And you can recognize males because they got big eyes. And we don't know why males have big eyes. There's the female done right there. It looks very similar except no big eyes. These are what pop up on the surface, or you're going to match with dry flies. And then you also will run into the spinner stage. This is a female spinner. And this is the male spinner. And so the males often look quite different. The abdomens are kind of clear because there's really nothing in the abdomen. Mayflies, when they emerge from the nymphs, have no mouth parts. They have no intestinal digestive organs because they can't eat. So the males are kind of an empty little cylinder there where the abdomen is. The females are full of eggs. So they have some, usually this rusty brown color. And in a day of fishing, when blue-winged olives are out there on the water, you could end up running through all of these different styles of fly patterns. You might end up fishing a nymph pattern mid-morning and emerging when the hatch starts, say around 1 or 2 o'clock. A cripple, if it's a little bit of breeze and kind of a cold, rainy day, which is good conditions for blue-winged olive hatches. A dry fly, a little small CDC or other type of dry fly, and then a spinner pattern, say at 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, depending on the time of year. So any of those and all of those flies could come into play in just one day because of the blue-winged olive activity. So you want a range of fly patterns available. You want nymphs, emergers, dries, and spinners. Here's Mr. Hughes. Again, a few years ago, not exactly a recent picture, on the Bighorn River. Jim was on this trip too, but he was always off somewhere else fishing, wouldn't let us see what he was doing. I don't know why. But Dave, you know, we did so many books and articles. We always had to get pictures of Dave holding fish. And you'd want to have a nice background, nice light. So we had a whole series of rubber trout made up. So Dave could just hold them would look good, and we get a nice photo of them. So that's a rubber brown trout we had there for Dave to hold. This is an example of a fish rising to a blooming olive hatch. This is actually on the Owyhee River, was probably in March, so not exactly winter. We fished over this fish with dry flies for a while. They weren't taking dries, so we put on that little emerger that you see up in the corner there, little floating nymph, and it floated right in the film. And that's what eventually, after a couple of drifts over this trout, as you'll see, it took that fly. So, a nice thing, this trout was very consistently rising, and you could watch it and see if the duns would float by, and it was ignoring the naturals as well as a dry, but it did take that little floating nymph. So that's one of the things that's important with these blue-winged olives. During a hatch, you're often going to do better with an emerger, something right in the film, than with an actual dry fly. Okay, boy, so this TV screen kind of blows out the color of the photos, so just have to bear with us on that. Spinner patterns. Don't forget about spinners. You might see some really good spinner falls in late afternoon, and they can be really useful to imitate, and you can get some nice fish. So don't forget about spinners. Okay, let's talk about midges a little bit for winter fishing. One thing is midges are going to be around every month of the year. And it's whether you're fishing lakes or streams. The chironomids or midges is one of the groups of aquatic insects that there's so many different species, hundreds and hundreds of different species, that they can be found in every water type and every water quality condition, from the worst water quality to the best water quality, from fast riffles to muddy bottoms, to sandy bottoms in lakes, to nice aquatic plants in lakes. So they literally occur everywhere. And at times they're the dominant food, again, available for fish to eat. And in the winter, they're often one of the main insects that do emerge in the winter. And of course, the frustrating part of them is that they're always small. In rivers, they're usually smaller than what you see in lakes. And you can really test your skill of putting a leader tip it into a fly pattern with midges. So the larvae are just these little tubes. That's about it. They live in the bottom of in the substrate, either lake or river. And that's where they hang out. And they do drift. And there's times when you look at stomach samples of trout, they've got a lot of midge larvae. But I don't usually imitate the larva. We'll get into the other stages here in a minute. And then here's the adult, which looks like a little mosquito, but midges never bite. If you're getting bit by something, it's not a midge. It's probably a mosquito or a black fly or something like that. So lakes, we know they're important in lakes, also important in rivers. This is a nice river up in BC. It's usually not that green in British Columbia, but tonight it is. This is the stage that you really spend most of your time imitating. It's the pupa stage. This develops on the substrate, but once the pupa are fully formed and ready to emerge, then they leave the substrate and wiggle up to the surface to emerge into the adult. And that's the time when you can really effectively imitate these guys. And it's the stage that trout often really key on during the midge activity. So you want to have good midge pupa patterns. Here's an example swimming up. Oop, went the wrong way, sorry. It's going up to the surface and rises. And then this is kind of a little video showing them how they wiggle. If you can get your fly to move like that, you're really doing good. That would be great. But then they finally get to the surface and it pops out into the adult stage. And fish do take the adults off the surface as well. But they can feed on those pupa anywhere from the bottom to the surface, particularly in lakes where you've got some deep water. Fish could be down at 30 feet feeding on these guys real intensely, or at 10 feet, or right up in the surface film feeding on the pupa. And that's one of the key things in lake fishing you need to figure out during a good midge hatch is how deep do you want to fish. Most of the time anglers try to fish close to the bottom, and they can figure out where the bottom is with a fish finder, depth finder, or dropping a line down and seeing how deep it is and adjusting your pupa so it hangs just off the bottom of the lake bed. And that's very effective. One of the things that they know now that pupa do is that they'll leave the substrate, but they don't come up towards the surface for some period of time. It could be a few minutes to a few hours. And they wait for that gases underneath the exoskeleton to expand and start moving them up towards the surface. So they could be a layer of dense pupa 6 inches or so off the bottom that might hang out there for a good length of time. And that's where the trout then can zero in on them and just kind of swim around and stuff themselves. And that's what you're trying to, of course, connect with when you're dropping your pupa pattern down there. Okay, and then the adults, nice little delicate looking dip-drip critter. The males have the hairy antennae, and we all know why men have hairy antennae. And then the pupa there, and in rivers, also fishing midges can be very effective. It's not as common to get involved in midge fishing in rivers so much, particularly here in Oregon. Go to Colorado, it's a big deal in Colorado. They fish midges a lot. One thing to pay attention to are foam lines like this. And where you see a foam line like this, that's where the little microcurrents on the surface are forcing these little foam bubbles together. That means they're also forcing any food in that same line on the surface. So any pupa that would be drifting would be right in that foam line. And that's where you could fish a pupa pattern right in the film or down a little bit. And it can be a very effective way. And you'll usually be fishing midges in streams in the slower parts of the river, not in the fast riffles typically. Lake fishing is critical to fish midges a lot of the time. This is a stomach sample from a trout up in one of the seep lakes in Washington State, eastern Washington. And there's a variety of critters in here. There's a bloodworm, a chironomid larva. There's a pupa, chironomid pupa. There's another pupa. Here's an emerging chironomid that's probably taken in the film. That's just this empty shock of a pupa after it emerged. This is an old black fly that came from somewhere. And then this is a caddis case. So this trout's been playing around with a variety of things to feed on, but certainly taking chironomid pupa. This is a typical fly box of someone who's really into fishing lakes. This is a friend of mine I fish with up in BC, and this is his chironomid pupa fly box. And you can see there's just all kinds of different sizes and colors, and some have beads that they're going to sink. Others have foam that they're going to float. And so you want to be able to fish these patterns at different depths. That's one thing that's really critical. And there he is, this is Paul, my buddy. He's out there fishing. This is Peter Hope Lake up in BC. And he's just kind of hanging out with his chironomid pupa there, waiting for something to grab his fly. A floating line with an indicator is typical, hanging above the bottom with no retrieve, or a different depth depending on where you think the fish are feeding, and sometimes right near the surface. Quick strip, typically not used, but if nothing else is working, you can always try it. Full sinking line sometimes gets used, but it's a lot harder to know exactly what depth you're at and to keep it there. So it's not the most common way to fish for a chironomid pupa in lakes. You do often need one of these slip strike indicators, because if you have 20-foot leader and your indicator's 20 feet from your fly, it's pretty hard to reel in a trout if the indicator won't slip up and down the leader when you get a fish on. Just a couple other shots of him fishing. In British Columbia, you're allowed to use two rods, but not two flies, which drives me crazy. And you get some very nice fish on these little flies. The other thing is when you see a bunch of scum and debris like this around the edge of a shoreline, take a close look at it. A lot of the time it's just empty shucks of what's been emerging. And you can see if it was a chironomid or a mayfly or a caddisfly. You can see what size they were. You won't always know what color the critters were, but you can learn a lot by looking at that scum that gets blown in by the wind along the shoreline. So let's look at that. And then don't go fishing near the surface with chironomids. This is a little fly pattern that a fellow I met up in Wenatchee fishes in the Seep Lakes up there. He calls it the ugly duckling, and it works really well in the surface during a chironomid hatch. So it's something you might think about trying. It's super easy to tie, as you can see. And you can get some nice fish. Okay, so in the winter, there's still lots of nymphs around, stoneflies, the blue-winged olives, even caddis are down there on the stream bottom in the middle of the winter. And in winter fishing, you know, the best hatches are going to be midday, 11 to 3. The water's cold, the fish are sluggish, so you need to usually get your flies close to fish. The water is really important. Nymph fishing is typically going to be your most productive. And then, you know, don't get cold. Don't fall in if you can help it. So that's what, let's go on to spring. What's going on in the spring? Speckled wing quills, calabatus in the spring, lake fishing, March browns, which we know and love here in the Willamette Valley. A lot of different caddis start coming off in the spring, saddle case caddis. And then the squala stonefly is another really good spring hatch. So let's look at some of these. And I wanted to start off with the calabatus hatch or speckled wing quill. And this is probably the best mayfly hatch on lakes. There's not many mayflies that live in lakes, many different species. And really the calabatus is the dominant one by far. So when it comes to what mayflies do you need for lake fishing, this is it. You really don't need to think too much others. Occasionally there'd be something else that will come into play. It's in the same family as the blue-winged olives, but it's a different genus. These can be found in rivers where you get slower slough creek habitat in rivers. You'll find calabatus, but you know, typically it's a lake bug that you're going to be seeing. Bigger gills, long antennae, 3 tails, those hairy fringes on the tail allow them to swim really well. So just like the blue-winged olives, they do swim great. Size-wise, a little bigger than the blue-winged olives, 16s, maybe a 14, but usually a 16 is a good bet. They're going to be along the shoreline typically in relatively shallower water. They're feeding on algae and organic material near the shoreline, water that's, say, 5 feet or less in depth. And rainy weather is great. They like to hatch when it's overcast. You will see hatches on sunny days, but generally you're going to get better emergence on overcast days. Time of year these come off. It's when the water starts warming up. You know, April is a great time. Sometimes it's May. It depends on the elevation. If you're up at a higher elevation, it might be late June, early July before you start seeing them. And one thing I forgot to mention with the blue-winged olives is that they hatch multiple seasons of the year. That's also true with the calabatus. They'll hatch in the spring, they'll hatch in the summer, and they'll hatch in the fall. As the hatches progress through the season, the size of them tends to decline. So you might fish a 14 in the spring, a 16 later, and then in fall you might be needing an 18. So the main thing is to look and see for sure what size is out there on the water when you're fishing. This is another picture up in BC, a nice shoal, and then it drops off in the deep water. The calabatus are in the shallower water. You're fishing for midges out here with midge patterns out in the deeper water. And every time this dark clouds would kind of come through during the day and a little squall would pass over, the calabatus would start hatching. And then the squall would move by and the sun would come out and they'd stop. And then about 2 or 3 hours later, a squall would come over and you, oh, good. And you'd roll over into the shallows and calabatus would start popping up again and fish would start feeding. So that's pretty typical. They do like cloudy conditions and a little rain is good. This was calabatus dun. This actually was taken on Blue Den here in the valley. People at Oregon Fishing Club know that lake. That's what they look like. Size 16, tan body, little mottled wing, pretty little mayfly. And the fish like taking them on the surface. They'll take them as emergers in the film, and they'll feed on the nymphs as they're rising up. So the nymphs, emergers, and duns are all important patterns. There's a bunch of nymphs. Here's the dun and the spinner. This is a dun again here. And here's the spinner. And this is why they're called speckled wing quill, because the spinners have these speckles in the wing. And there's a spinner on the surface, how they'll sit there when they die on the surface, their wings out flat. That's what you want to imitate during a spinner fall. And don't forget to look at spider webs. Spider webs are great places to figure out what the heck's going on. And these were just hanging off of a picnic bench next to a lake over in the Blue Mountains. And I'm going, well, I wonder if there are any spinners happening this, time we're out there fishing. And you look at the spider, oh, I guess there have been a spinner fall. And so right away, you know that's been some activity that's been going on, and you might not have seen yet when you've just arrived at the lake. So it's a great way to figure out some things that might be happening. Always look at spider webs. Nymph patterns, there's some real standard types of patterns used for Callibaetis. Probably people here in the audience have their favorite patterns, I'm sure. Old merger patterns are good too. Fish this right in the film. And I've also at times had good luck with little soft hackles fished right in the film. If it's a windy day and kind of blustery and the duns are having a hard time getting off the water, there'll be cripples. They don't get off. They don't fly away. And just throw it out there, let the wind drift your fly across the surface right in the film. And sometimes that'll work better than a dry fly. So it's always worth thinking about that. This is John Smeralio catching a big fish on a little nymph pattern over in Central Oregon. And the fish definitely take nymphs just fine. So pretty fish. And then dry flies, I know there's a lot of different patterns that are used. This is one I often use, a Harapdon. Not comparedons, parachute patterns work well. And then you do need a spinner pattern too. And those can be tricky, but if you get a good spinner pattern, fish like to take those spinners. And you can get some big fish. This is Dave again with his rubber rainbow. And he even gets these rubber fish to jump, which is pretty amazing for good pictures. Okay, so the Western March Brown, that's a hatch that people here in the Valley know quite well, and for good reason. It's a wonderful hatch that happens in the spring when we're anxious to get out and start fishing again. This is what the nymphs look like. They're a clinger nymph. So unlike the blue nymphs, which are good swimmers, these guys aren't. They're really well adapted to clinging to bottom rocks and the substrate, and they don't get washed into the current very much. So you're not just going to run out there and start fishing March Brown nymphs for the heck of it, like you could with blue-winged olives. But during a hatch, they have to let go of the bottom and swim to the surface. So if you're out there on a period of the year when the hatches are active, but hasn't started during the time of day yet, you're out there earlier, that's when fishing a nymph pattern can be effective, because the fish are looking, they've seen nymphs, the nymphs are going to start swimming up to the surface prior to the hatch. And one reason they can stick to the bottom so well is this is the gills, and they form this really good suction cup that keep them stuck right to the stream bottom. And here's a really bright green spring day on the Willamette, kind of classic water, where you'd find March Brown nymphs in those riffly areas, and in the flats below is where, of course, you end up seeing the duns floating downstream. And there's a March Brown on the surface, nice, about size 14, it's pretty typical. Again, two tails, nice mottled wing, tannish body, real pretty mayfly, and pretty easy to match, really, with the dry fly patterns. And fishing dry flies is certainly the way I like to fish it, and often very effective. This is the Eastern March Brown. I took this photo back in New York on the beaver kill, and the interesting thing about it, it's really a big bug. It's like a size 10. It's the size of our green drakes. But it's called the March Brown, the Eastern March Brown, different species. But that's where the common name came from. People moving from the East Coast out here saw this bug, oh, that's a March Brown. But they do look similar, but they're not at all the same. And then here's the spinner. For some reason, I've never run into a spinner fall of March Browns that amounted to anything in terms of fish feeding on them. Maybe somebody here has. I see spinners occasionally, but I've never seen a big spinner fall with fish feeding on them. So, And then there's Mr. Hughes fishing a typical riffle with nymphs prior to a hatch on the Willamette. You just drifting the nymphs close to the bottom and letting them swing up towards the surface on the tail end of your drift. It's a good way to fish. And then once the hatch is going, usually you switch over to a dry fly. Sometimes an emerger in the film is going to be better. But again, a hair-up done for me works really well. And then you want a variety of styles. Again, a nymphs patterns, some emergers done, and then a spinner, although the spinners for the March Browns don't usually come into play. Okay, so what else happens in the spring? One thing is the squallow stonefly. That's a great hatch in the spring, and this is the Owyhee River over by Ontario. And March and April is a really good time over there for the squallow stoneflies to be out, usually late March, early April. It's kind of when you can expect it. There's Dave. That's how he looks for hatches. We climb way up on the ridge and then look down. You don't want to scare the fish. You don't want to get too close to the river and scare the fish. So we're out there. This was after the flows come up. They start releasing more water for irrigation season around, I don't know, early part of April. And it will go from a flow of 20 CFS to 200 CFS. And this is at about 200 CFS. But it fishes really good at 200. And so, you can fish it at both conditions. And there was a good blue-winged olive hatch coming off when we were over there. And that's what Dave's fishing for right there, is with some little dry flies on blue-winged olives. And we were having some nice fishing with that. So again, that's blue-winged olives come into play a lot. And then this is a little video just showing folks, I know a lot of people here are experienced and they're familiar with the reach cast, but it's one of those things that anytime you're kind of trying to improve your success, learning to make a reach cast effectively is really helpful. He's just reaching his rod right or left. The fly is landing in the same place, but the line is at a different angle on the water. And that's where you can avoid drag. And when you're fishing dry flies or emergers in the film, drag is something you want to avoid. So learning to do the reach cast is really, really helpful. Something that if you go to those casting classes in Saturday mornings, you can get some help with. And it's very, very helpful. So the squallow is a stonefly that comes off in the spring. It's not as big as the big, well-known stonefly hatches. It's about a size 10. And it's a very good bug hatch in a lot of places in the West. And the Yakima's become like the thing to do, is go fish the Yakima in the spring for the squallow. The Deschutes has them, the Willamette has them, the Mackenzie has them, the Owyhee has them. It's a widely occurring bug. But the thing with them is they don't like to fly. They can fly, but they crawl around on the bank and they crawl around on the wheels. Another common name for them is the brown wheel fly. And so you don't see them in the air flying around, so you often don't notice them. But if you see one or two, then you can probably expect that there's quite a few more out there. So just don't let seeing one or two make you think, oh, it's not much of a hatch. Start fishing a dry fly, because the females run out from the bank to lay their eggs. They don't see them in the air flying and dropping to the water. They just are on the shoreline, they've been mated, and then they run out from the bank on top of the water surface, lay their eggs, and then kind of run back. So start fishing dry flies really close to shore, and that's what Dave's doing. He's just working up this bank, fishing right in against the willows with some success. So there's a female squallow, and there's the male, and the males typically have short wings and can't fly. So it's another reason these guys like to crawl around. They're really fast little runners on the ground, and that's where they spend most of their time. Typical dry fly, brownish colored body, works well, size 10, and just fishing the shoreline. That's where you want to fish. And you can pick up some really nice fish. You don't see typical rise, you don't see fish rising to them like a hatch. If you go around, fish are looking for them. And so you're just fishing the water. And there's that rubber brown trout again. Just pop up everywhere. Okay, caddis hatches. I'm going to talk more about caddis in the summer section coming up, but there are a variety of caddis in the spring. Saddle case caddis, the Mother's Day caddis in May. The green rockworm comes out in the spring. So you're going to see a variety of caddis flies during that spring period as well. Spring fishing, a lot of activity, midday, kind of like winter during the middle of the day. Multiple hatches are common. You might see more than one bug out. Squala could be hatching and blue-winged olives as well. Usually if I see blue-winged olives around, I'm fishing a blue-winged olive pattern. No matter what else is going on. Blue-winged olives seem to be what fish really like to eat. Water might be cold and high, so sometimes you got to go down, fish nymphs. Weather changes rapidly. You might end up fishing streamers even during high water. So a lot of different situations pop up. Okay, summer, June, July, and August. Great time, lots of nice fishing. Sometimes it's hard to find the fish in the summer because the fish have maybe gone in a little deeper water. It's a little sunny out. They don't like the bright sun. So you can put on a wetsuit and the mask and snorkel and swim around and find out exactly where they're at. And that's what I do for Dave. I'll go out and I'll find the fish for him, say, fish here. Or I'll do it for a small fee for people too, so you want to have somebody locate the fish. It's kind of the old school way without fish finders. But it is fun. So in the summer, you're going to see in June, July, August, we're talking about now, the big stoneflies, the golden stones, the salmon flies. Those hatches now, at least on the Deschutes, are more of a spring hatch instead of a summer hatch because they're hatching earlier. So in some sense, that's now moved into a different season. But we'll talk about them here in the summer. And then the little yellow sallies, the yellow stoneflies are out in the summer. Green drakes, pale morning duns, the amyloidus, the brown duns, and then a bunch of caddisflies. So there's just a lot of different insects that will come out that time of year in the summer. There's also snakes out. Of course, on the Deschutes, you want to be aware of rattlesnakes. This is my wife, Carol. We were out fishing this a few years ago, and this rattlesnake was right under the rail there. And so we had to demonstrate what you do to calm a rattlesnake down. The best thing you can do is just get close and kind of blow your breath on it. Kind of just puts them to sleep. No, don't do that. Don't do that. That snake was cut in half by a train, and then we stuck both ends under the rail. So that was quite a dead rattlesnake. Don't want to get close to a rattlesnake. Okay, so in the summer you could see things like tricos, late summer, August. Not so much in Oregon, but if you fish Montana, especially the Missouri, great hatch in August. And you're going to see a lot of activity on the surface with tricos. There's what the little duns look like. These are tiny 22s, so you're fishing these tiny flies to big fish. A lot of fun. Evening, fishing right at dark is often the best time of day in the summer. It's been bright sun and hot, so trout don't tend to usually spend a lot of time out feeding in those kinds of conditions. So as the sun's off the water in the evening, right before dark, that's when a lot of activity takes off. And this is really a nice photo, but it doesn't look too good there. And that's really bright. Midday, sometimes, you're not going to see hatches often midday. They're more often morning and evening, late afternoon. You can go out with kind of an attractor fly, just a bigger dry fly, a spider pattern, something like that, and just fish the water. And the fish are looking for terrestrials. Might look for a moth or a beetle. So some sort of attractor patterns or terrestrial flies midday can work really well in the summer. And you can get some really nice fish. So it's not always about finding a dense hatch. It's just kind of thinking about what's the best time of day and what bugs are flying around. But let's talk about the big stoneflies. The salmon fly is, of course, critical hatch that you want to be prepared for. These guys are one of the biggest North American aquatic insects. I mean, when they're fully grown, they can be 3 inches long. They're really huge. They have a big set of bushy gills underneath the thorax for breathing, and that sort of that and their color, the uniform brownish color, is what really distinguishes them, their size, color, and gills. And it also takes those nymphs about 4 years to get fully grown. So any time of the season, there's some nymphs out there. The ones that just hatched are gone, but the younger year classes are still in the river. So there's salmon fly nymphs available to trout year round. And then when they hatch, usually now like on the Deschutes, usually like the third week of May, fourth week of May is the peak. You're going to see these big salmon fly adults crawling around on the grass everywhere, and can be great dry fly fishing. There's the adult. Now, at the same time, often at the same time that the salmon flies are out, so are the golden stones, at least on the Deschutes. There's 3 species of golden stones. The top left here is Callineria californica. This is the most common in the Coast Range, west side of the Cascades. This guy is called Clausinia subullosa. It's hatches in the fall, and it used to be kind of rare in the sampling. When I'd go out and kick rocks, I'd usually like, oh, I finally found one. Now I find them all the time. And I think the warming climate, they do a little better in warmer conditions. They're becoming more prevalent. And it's usually a late fall, like mid-September hatch. They tend to be wings or short wings and can't fly. And it's another one of these that run off from the bank out onto the water to lay their eggs. It's very well known in streams like the mine's going to blank, the Bow River in Canada and Alberta. The guides love to fish this in the fall and have for years. It's not really a new thing up there. But I'm seeing it more common on streams I fish all around the West. So these are all roughly going to be like 8's 3x longs for nymphs, 8 3x longs for dries, and all these species are roughly the same size. So they're big, good-sized bug, not as big as a salmon fly, but close. And then this is the species on the Deschutes. This particular individual is a more brightly colored than most. Most are more of just a dark brown with some light banding. But this one was really dramatic colors and made a nice picture. But this is Hesperopearl pacifica. This is the one that you see as the golden stone on the Deschutes all the time. As adults, you can't really tell them apart. They all look like a golden stone. Unless you start dissecting out the male genitalia and looking at it under a microscope, you won't know which is which, so don't worry about it. But they have the nice golden brown color, and a size 8, 3x long is a pretty close match. And then there's the salmon fly adult. So you can kind of see they're pretty easy to tell apart. And with all of these big nymphs, and the golden stone nymphs take multiple years to fully grow too, usually about 3 years. All of these nymphs are crawling around, and in the spring, before the hatch, or late spring, early summer, they start crawling out. They have to crawl out on the bank to emerge. They don't emerge in the film, like mayflies. So fish your nymph patterns along the shoreline, close to the bank. Don't worry about casting out here and all of this water. Yeah, there'll be some trout out there and probably some, but the fish are following these nymphs in closer to shore, and it's a heck of a lot easier to fish close to shore, and you're going to catch more fish if you do that with your nymphs and dries. There are no emerger patterns needed for stoneflies because they don't emerge in the surface. They emerge on dry land. So you're either fishing a nymph on the bottom or you're fishing a dry fly on the surface. And a variety of styles and nymph patterns, all of them weighted to get down right on the bottom. And this just shows that after the hatch, this might be a size 8 or 6 they would use in the spring when they're migrating towards shore. But after the hatch is over, this is the size of the nymphs. They're much smaller, the ones that are still out there in the river. So don't keep using those big nymphs after the hatches are over. If you're going to fish them in, say, June, July, August, or the fall, use a size 12 or even a 10. And then here's the Normwood Special with a golden stone. And, there's stimulators and the Clark stone. There's a variety of different dry flies that people use for the golden stones. And again, the key with these dry flies, fish close to shore, under the trees, along the little swirling eddies along the bank. And that's where you're going to have your best success. Okay, the last thing in summer I want to talk about are caddisflies. I haven't talked about them in detail yet, but caddis are really important. And there's a lot of different species of caddis, but they have somewhat similar characteristics in behavior and kinds of fly patterns. The one I want to talk about for summer is the net spinning caddis, the genus Hydropsyche. They make little porous clusters, kind of a shelter on the side of rocks in the riffle areas of a stream. And in the front of that little shelter, they spin a web out of silk, just like a spider web. That little web is made by the larva. And that's how they catch their food. That web strains the food drifting down in the current, and it gets caught in the web, and they come out and feed on it. And so that's why they're called net spinning caddis. These guys are extremely abundant and extremely common. They're the equivalent of the blue-winged olive when it comes to caddisflies. You're going to find them in every trout stream you fish, probably, and often in really high abundance. So you want patterns for them. This just shows a number of those little shelters on a rock lined up, all feeding with a net spinning caddis in each one. And there's the larva. Oh, they're like a size 14 is the bigger ones, 16s, so 16s and 14s. Some are olive green, some are pretty bright green, some are tan. So a few ranges of colors, because again, we're talking about a variety of species. And they don't really, they can't swim, and they don't really drift too much, except you get into situations like this where there's so many on a rock. All these are net spinning caddis. You know, this guy's net's blocking food from that guy, and so they get too congested. And then they just let go and drift down and find a rock that's a little less crowded. So these nymphs do drift, and fishing pattern to match these nymphs can be very effective. It's kind of my second favorite nymph pattern is one of these little caddis larvae and a blue-winged olive nymph. Those are kind of my two favorite nymph patterns. I'll show you that in a minute. And then here's the pupa. Oh, sorry, I gotta turn this off. There we go. This is some hydropsychic pupa that we just took off a rock and put them in the tray, and they were alive, and so they're wiggling around. And again, if you get your fly to move like that, would be nice. But these are like a size 16, and this is the shape and what the fish are feeding on during the caddis hatch. These pupa form inside those shelters, but when they're mature, they cut out and swim to the surface. So that's when you're fishing. A pupa pattern is very effective, and what you want to match during a caddis hatch. And then here's the adult net spinning caddis, also called a spotted sedge in the adult stage. 16s and 14s, probably 16s is most common. There's the larva, and then there's the pupa again. So very important bugs to imitate. There's Jim Schomeyer fishing the Deschutes River at Indian Riffle probably 40 years ago. But this is great habitat for net spinning caddis. And we would generally be out there and getting some really nice caddis activity in that riffle, either fishing pupa or dry flies. And in the summer, you might see egg laying activity right at dark, but the hatches could hatch, you know, middle of the day from 10 to 3, depending on the cloud cover and weather. And then the egg laying is usually right near dusk. The other thing is that you'll see a lot of caddis adults in the grass. And if you're walking out to the stream and the wind's blowing, even though there's no hatch activity, just like grasshoppers getting blown in, the adult caddis get blown in. So just fish a dry fly right along the shoreline. This is on Rock Creek in Montana. And use a dry caddis pattern if there's a lot of them in the grass and the wind's blowing. So again, it's just kind of what's out there for fish to eat. These caddis flies, the other really interesting thing is the females, they mate on the foliage, then the females fly back to lay their eggs. They don't drop to the surface and lay their eggs on the surface. The females actually swim to the bottom and physically put their eggs on a rock and then let go and drift or kind of swim and drift back to the surface. So if you're out there in the evening and there's just all this activity going on, you see some fish rolling and a little bit of surface activity, you put a dry fly on it, it just drifts by and you're not getting any takes, sink your dry fly. Get it to go underwater. LaFontaine talked about this in his book Caddisflies that came out, 30, 40 years ago. And that's where he came up with the diving adult caddis patterns. And it makes a lot of sense. You can just sink your deer hair caddis, put a split shot on your leader and just sink it. Cast it up and across, let it go under, let it swing dead drift, come up to the surface, the end of the drift. And you can do better with that than with a dry on the surface at times. So if the dry flies aren't working the evening, just hope you time like I do because they're going to sink anyway, and you'll be in good shape. So just again, a series of flies, larva, pupa, and adult. And then this is just kind of talking about what I was just saying, you know, in the evening, get a lot of adult activity out there, can be pretty active in terms of fish feeding, but maybe your dry flies aren't working, so sink them. This is a pattern that I've started, I found this maybe 10 years ago, but I've been using it a lot. Just it's called CDC and elk, just a little deer hair, and then just one CDC feather is tied for the body. You kind of twist it, tied in by the tip of the CD feather here, twist it together to form the body, and then untwist it to form the hackle, and that's it. And it'll float well, but if you want to sink it, it'll sink, and all that CDC catches bubbles of air, looks really good underwater. So it's just a very versatile fly. And don't forget about terrestrials. They're also out in the summer, beetles and ants in particular. Okay, summer fishing, heaviest morning and evening activity, terrestrial insects midday. Again, multiple hatches are common. Look closely because sometimes it's difficult to know which of those multiple hatches the bugs are actually feeding on or what stage. And then fishing's often best on an overcast day, certainly for dry fly fishing. Okay, last fall. Let's just hit a few things for fall and we'll wrap this up. Blue dolls are up again. The green, about that here. Mahogany guns will be out in the fall. And the October caddis, of course, is out in the fall. So let's talk about October caddis first. You might have fished at this just a month ago. I was over on the on the Benson River by French Glen in late September this year, and there was a really good hatch of October caddis that the fish were taking. This is what the larvae look like. Big case caddis, size 10s. The larvae are crawling around throughout the winter or spring. They go into the pupa stage midsummer, and then the pupa come popping out in the fall to emerge into the adult. If you want to fish a big case caddis pattern as a nymph pattern, you want to do that in the spring and early summer. By midsummer, these guys are all hunkered down in the pupa stage and are really not so much available to fish anymore. But in the spring and early summer, you can fish a big case caddis pattern effectively. Fish will go along and pull these guys right off the rocks. So, you know, they do get eaten. This is the Laxaw River in Idaho. Great October caddis hatch there, typically. Here's what happens when they go into the pupa stage. They seal these larva cases up, and inside is where they're changing into a pupa and maturing as a pupa, ready to get up and change into an adult. This takes at least 4 to 6 weeks. If you open up a case, you might see a pupa like this without dark wing pads. This means it's got quite a bit more time to go before it's mature. If you see one like this with really dark wing pads, that means it's probably ready to hatch. And when they hatch, they come out of the case out here in the mid-current somewhere, crawl along the bottom until they get to a shoreline rock, and then crawl up on the side of the rock to emerge into the adult, much like a stonefly would. So they don't come shooting up to the surface like most caddisflies. And that means you want to fish your pupa pattern close to the bottom, which I'll show a pattern for that in a minute. And then here's the adult October caddis, been about a size 10. Nice bug. On some streams like the Locksaw, fish take the adult really well. I've never found fish on the Deschutes pay much interest in the adults, but you can get them better on the pupa patterns. So some places fish like the Blitzen, the fish were happy to take the adults there. Here's a case pattern here, case caddis. A pupa pattern like this, heavily weighted to fish them right along the bottom. And then a dry fly like a stimulator or something will work for the adults. And yeah, if it's time of year when they're hatching, you can fish that pupa pattern, cast it out, let it swing over towards the shoreline, and then just do a little slow hand twist retrieve through good looking, holding water for trout. And sometimes that'll work quite well. Usually in the morning, these tend to hatch at night. So the fish are going to be most cued into the pupa patterns in the mornings. And then the adults are flying around usually in the mid-afternoon. And here's on the Locksaw, fishing with Skip and Carol Morris a few years ago. Also in the fall is the mahogany dun. And so mostly we're fishing October caddis, but then Carol decided to put on a different fly, and Skip was like, oh, no, that's not going to work. And we had this little, debate going on, got a little heated. And then, of course, she caught a nice fish. I was like, oh, great. I'll never hear the end of that. And, of course, there was a nice trout. And, she's, yeah, he's never going to this one. Anyway, kind of fun. So that's the October caddis. What about the mahogany dun? Really good mayfly hatch. Used to be really good on the Deschutes, but it's hardly found on the Deschutes at all now because of the changes there. But that's a whole other topic. This is the larval stage, the mahogany dun. That's a genus called Paralleptophlebia. And a big name for a little bug, about a size 16. And the real distinguishing feature here are these two fork-shaped gills. It's the only mayfly that has, one of the only, not the only, but one of the only mayflies that has gills like that. And it can be quite a good abundant little hatch in the fall. There's one species that has big mandibles like this. This is specific to this species called Paralleptophlebia bicornuta, but big mandibles, kind of cool looking bug. And this is the dun stage. Size 16, 3 tails, and nice, just the whole thing's brown body, kind of brownish colored wings. And size 16 brown fly is going to work. And this was taken just a month ago over on the Lamar River in Montana, in the park, I guess Wyoming, in Yellowstone Park. And that's the kind of water and the time of year that mahogany duns are going to be hatching. They're going to be in the slower water, and they'll be often crawling up or hatching in just a few inches of water near shore into the duns. And then they drift down, the wind will blow them out into the water, and you can have some good dry fly fishing. So keep an eye out for these in the fall. They can be quite entertaining. Usually you're going to fish dry flies when they're out and about. And maybe even catch a bison. And there's the, again, that harrop dun keeps popping up because it's a fly I use a lot, and it works. So green rockworms. That's the other caddis I want to talk about because it's really valuable to have flies for it. This is the larva. It doesn't build a case. They're called a free-living caddis because they build no cases. Size-wise, could be as big as a 12. Usually 14s is a good bet. Like a 2X long nymph hook, size 14 is a great size. They're out there in good numbers in a lot of really nice trout streams, and people don't tend to notice them. They don't swim. They kind of hang out on the bottom. They do drift. And it's become one of my favorite nymph patterns. So this is a stream up in eastern British Columbia. My son fishing some years ago. But this is the nymph pattern I use a lot. It's just, again, crystal flash body, little dubbing and a bead head, size 14. A lot of the net spinning caddis are also green. So this pattern will work for the green rockworms, also works for a lot of net spinning caddis larvae. And it's just one of those nymph patterns that I've had success with fishing a lot of different trout streams in a lot of different seasons. So, something along those lines would be worth having. There's a lot of different ways of tying a green rockworm nymph pattern. And then they pupate. While they don't make a shelter as larvae, they do to pupate in, and that's what the pupa looks like. And it'll come swimming up to the surface, hanging out in the surface film until the adult pops out. And you might use, a soft hackle to imitate the pupa coming up. I'll show some more patterns. And the thing about caddis pupa like this, not so much the October caddis, but the other caddis, net spinning caddis, green rockworms, they're really good swimmers. As you see here, they can swim really fast. So this guy's getting a little bit of a headache here on the side of the dish. But you can imagine if that was open water, how fast they'd be moving. So giving your fly, your pupa pattern some action is fine. Drag is okay with caddis pupa. So don't be afraid about, you don't necessarily need a drag-free float with caddis pupa when you're fishing it. Here's the adult green rockworm. This is an adult saddle case caddis, also out in the fall. And there's the larva, and then there's the pupa. So those are the three stages. You want patterns for all three. Size 14s are a good size to go with. And then just a series of styles, a couple of different nymph patterns. Here's another nymph pattern. Here's a pupa pattern. That's, of course, a LaFontaine sparkle pupa can work well. And then these adults also dive underwater to lay their eggs. So some sort of dry fly that looks good on the surface, also underwater, can be helpful. So fall fishing activity is midday, back to like it was in the spring. Less multiple hatches are common, but it can occur, and fish can be really selective in the fall because the water is low and clear, and they've been fished over a lot, maybe, and so they can be really, really challenging sometimes, and fun to fish for because it's challenging, but it can be tricky. Small flies are often really important, and blue-winged olives come off again in the fall, so look for blue-winged olives. So what's the best season? Any season you can go out, it's the best season. Sometimes in the winter, you don't have to be cold in the winter because you can fly south and end up in a place like Chile. This was a junket that the real boondoggle Jim and Dave and I got to go on a new operation in Chile called Nomads of the Sea. And the guy built this special ship that had 5 jet boats on the back, a helicopter pad, and we go down the coast of Chile and take clients up these rivers and fly you in the lakes. Pretty ridiculous. We got connected with one of the guys Dave and I knew that was marketing this new business, and we got free trip down there. They were getting a bunch of people, a fly fishing industry, to take pictures and write about it. So anyway, it was kind of a goofy, well, not goofy, a pretty neat thing that we got to go on. So it was fun. There's Dave and Masako out in the estuary going up some river to fish for big trout. Pretty cool. And they serve pretty good food too. It was ridiculous. They had a hot tub on top, and you sit there, they'd bring you wine. Terrible. On a different trip, Carol and I, as my wife Carol's, we were down in Chile on a different trip completely, but the fishing down there is amazing. It's a lot of fun. And if you get a chance, I'd recommend it. This was funny because we were fishing this area and fishing kind of streamers, really. And the guy was saying, "Oh, I never take dries. Don't put a dry on." Carol said, "Oh, I think I'll put a dry on just for I'm tired of fishing a streamer." And that's the fish she caught on a dry fly that they said, "No, they don't take dries." And then there were some horses that weren't very cooperative at times, but it was some fun trips I've had down there and some big fish. So if you get a chance, I'd recommend it. Just to really summarize here, these are kind of different things you'd see in streams and lakes, different seasons. In this winter and spring, I know this talk's going to go online and be available to watch for at least a month. So you could go back and look at this if you want to kind of keep track of some of the things that I didn't get a chance to talk about tonight. But these are all, written up in books and stuff. Jim's books have covered this really well, so there's a lot of information out there nowadays. Summer, pretty big list, and then in the fall, also lots of different things I haven't had a chance to talk about. But that's it. So thank you. If there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. I do have a couple of books. The one that's back in the auction, but I've got a few up here if people are interested. So let me know.
Question? Okay, here's a question.
Can you say something about the Mackenzie River green caddis?
Yeah, the Mackenzie Special. It's a net spinning caddis that unfortunately is not as abundant as it used to be. It's called Arctopsyche grandis is the species, but it's a net spinner like I talked about it, but it's a big net spinner. So instead of a 14 or so, a 16, it'll be like a size 10 or 12. And it's, famous hatch in the spring, usually in May, mostly in the upper river, around Blue River in that area, still around. I was out once looking for the pupa because I'd always wanted to find the pupa. And I was in the South Fork of the Mackenzie. I went out into the fastest chute of water I could stand up in and rolled the rock over. It was about the size of this desk, this podium. And on the bottom side of that boulder were pupating Arctopsyche. And I was like, wow, that's where they're pupating in this super fast water. So anyway, it was historically just one of the key hatches in the Mackenzie every spring. And they're still around. They just don't have, and I don't know why the abundance has declined, but they're not as abundant as they used to be. That's what I know. Yeah.
More questions? Okay. Yeah. Rick, I know you're familiar with blue den.
Yeah.
I've seen the dragonflies out there, and if I recall from your books, there's two main types. One has kind of a stubby, thick body, and one's more of an elongated body. Which one of them is up there in blue den?
Both. So when you see the bigger, faster flying ones that are, the blue and black colored ones, those are the nymphs of that adult are the long, skinny nymphs that are climbers and are pretty active and better to imitate with nymphs. But when you see the smaller ones that are usually reddish and orange, those are the squatty nymphs that are more camouflaged that lay on the bottom. So they're both out there. But if you're fishing nymph patterns, you'd want to use the longer, skinnier ones for those climbers that are active. Yeah.
How about
Questions?
talk about the limbatus? The what? That big yellow.
The big yellow mayfly. So we have them in Oregon. In quite a few places, they're on Blue Den for one day. You can go out there in June and July. you never see them anywhere here. And I don't know why in the last couple of years they've completely died off. Don't occur, and they hatch in the morning, right at first sunrise, right in the morning. Mary Lake has a good hatch. Lost Lake up on Mount Hood has a good hatch. It's particularly well known on the upper Williamson River, which is pretty interesting fishing for it up there. Access can be a little tricky on the upper Williamson, but they're up there as well. And there are other places in Oregon too that they do happen. The Columbia, if you got a boat on the Columbia, people that live out there have them land on their houseboats along the Columbia. Right at dusk is when they hatch. Timothy Lake. I've had good fishing with them on Timothy Lake in June, usually mid to late June, early July. It's kind of a spread out hatch. It'll start usually in mid-June, but it'll last all the way through July. So it's not like a short period of time to find them. And some evenings you'll see a good hatch, some evenings not. You want a nymph, an emerger, and a dry fly. Sometimes, you can fish a nymph dry dropper with a nymph, and the fish will really hammer the nymph. And then other times, you're going to see them hatch. They look like little birds coming off the water. So it's a lot of fun, and it's pretty crazy if you hit it right, and there's a good number of them out. And it's all this activity right at dark. You're just like going crazy because you're trying to try a different fly on, or you broke a fly off on a big fish. And it's like getting too dark to see, and all you hear are these fish jumping and splashing, and it's like, yikes. So, it can get pretty crazy, but a lot of fun. So I don't know if that kind of got to your specifics, but they're around and yeah, worth checking into. Yeah.
Where do you buy those river fish?
I know, I'm going to put them on my website. I think there'll be a big need for a lot of interest in those coming up. Oh, my pleasure. It's great to be here.